So what I want to try and do today is to, well, this is not training. So people who have been here before know that this is not a training session. What I do is I discuss my ideas and my thoughts that have come out of what I've been doing for about, 28 years or so as a psychologist working in lots of different organisations. So this is me throwing some thoughts to you, some practicalities. And what I'm hoping to do is just to get you to think seriously about how you do things. So this is not me telling you how to do it. This is me asking you, ask yourself the question, does what you do right now really, really work? And which bits work and which bits don't? In particular, this morning, I want you to consider commitment and agreement. In particular, I want to try and give agreement a bad name in your eyes. I want to try to discredit agreement. And my hope is that when you experiment, and it is for experimentation, take this stuff away, take the bits and pieces, just take one thing and try it. Don't take my word for it. This is stuff that has to live in the real world. But I think if you have a crack at not pushing for agreement all the time, for reasons that will become clear, hopefully, in the next 30 minutes, then you might get some interesting results. And it would be lovely to hear about your experiments too. So I'm going to start off this morning right away. But essentially, I want to get to the end where maybe you recognise that agreement is a great outcome, but it's a lousy objective. And if we get that far, fantastic. So where do we begin? Well, let's begin with the practicalities of what it's actually like to be in a situation where we're trying to get commitment, but often we're trying to actually get agreement. And what happens in these situations is that when we try and get a lot of different people on board, we're on a loser from the start. But eventually, if you picture the scene, there you are, you're in a meeting with me and you're trying to persuade me and other people. And eventually, particularly if you are the most senior person, you're proposing solution A, I'm proposing solution B. And at one point, one of us is going to start to give in. It might be because it's safer that way. Maybe we're starting to. So it could be a safety shot. It could be that we've started to get embarrassed. It could be that we're running out of time. It could be that people are starting to get annoyed with us. Whichever way you call it. One thing is for certain. We're going to actually end up in a situation where something almost happens. And that is the worst scenario of all. So let me paint the flow chart for you, as it were, of what happens. So I commit to do something and I do some work, and this is me here. I commit to do something, and then you see that I've done something, and you also kind of chip in, and maybe you write a paper, or maybe you have another meeting about it, or maybe you talk to some of your guys and girls. And then what you do is you see then me, and then I see you do something, you think, okay, well, I'm going to join in as well. I'll do a bit more. And then you do a bit more. But progressively, each time, it gets smaller and smaller. I do something if you do something, and vice versa. Eventually, one of us, because we're both busy people, bins it. And then the other one does too. And then the next thing that happens is that we end up at a meeting making excuses about why it didn't happen. And if we're not very nice people, what will actually happen next is that we begin to blame each other. So what is the problem here? Well, what's actually happening is that our determination is going against us. I get an idea in my head and I really want everybody else to buy into it. But unfortunately, as I become more determined, so that wakes up determination in everybody else. And potentially, if I have a big personality and I have a shouty voice, people will then start to turn off, and they will start to give me lots of reasons why something can't happen. And then probably I become more insistent, because that's the kind of guy I am. And so we start a pitched battle of wills. The problem is that we're all in our jobs because we are good at what we do. We're thinking people. And what happens is that we don't take that into account in the old model of autocracy, telling each other what to do. Because everybody, particularly these days, millennial workers, probably the people who report into you, you might be one of them. I'm an old crock now, God. But people expect to be able to have a say, to have autonomy, to be able to use their brains. And the problem with not letting people use their brains is that they just won't do it. But I'll come on to that in a second. The thing with agreement is that it doesn't just require a change of action, but we need to persuade people to change their beliefs. And because we tend to do this kind of stuff in meetings, we're asking somebody to make a switch to persuade them that black is in fact white, and we're doing it against the clock. And of course that turns the pressure up and makes me misbehave. I start to take liberties with your intellect, with autonomy. People change their beliefs slowly. We change what we think and what we believe slowly. We might say we've changed on the outside, as I said before, just to keep the peace. But by definition, we have to change our mind by our own free will. And we won't be rushed. So the problem is that this business of changing is not actually binary. And what we actually need to do is to provide people with opportunities to see each other's point of view, to actually see that it is much fuzzier. So by allowing different views, and this is what commitment does, commitment allows room for different opinions. It means that nobody actually has to be wrong. We don't have to discount anybody's views, because everybody can find stuff to agree with or to align with, if not agree, but actually say, okay, I see what you're on about. I don't agree, but I see where you're coming from. Now, what allowing multiple views does, it allows us to be able to use the language that's really going on for us. What do I mean by that? I mean the thoughts that we're really having. I can start to talk about my small reservations without having to worry, or without having to find an excuse to bring them into the room. If people can say what's on their minds because I have invited multiple views, then stuff gets said that if there were only two versions on show, mine and yours, that wouldn't happen. So by not mandating things right from the very beginning and asking people to commit to A or B, we allow people to give us insight to where they are, not just whether they're with us or against us. Okay, so how does that actually happen in practice? Let's go into a bit of detail on that. I want to talk about the structure of commitment with a couple of examples that we could use. These are dumb examples, but for example, let's say I decide as the world marketing director that all presentations will be done on a particular template. And most people, of course, and I don't have access to most people, think it absolutely stinks. And they just don't use it. And so what me and my marketing team and my internal comms team turn out to be is a bunch of policemen and women. We then have to police something that people never wanted to use in the first place. Option B is to actually encourage people to come up with what they think is a good version. So instead of saying, I want you to use this presentation from now on, the commitment version is, I want you to get these messages across, or I want us to be able to get these messages across so that people can understand our offering. What does that presentation look like? Answers on a postcard. So there's one example. Another example. I want to make a particular acquisition. I'm the head of M&A, and I said, this is the one to go for. Or I am a member of the board, or I am the CEO, and I am desperately trying to sell a particular acquisition to the board. Now, what I'm doing is courting disaster, because I'm giving people a final decision that they might get some of, but not all of. But I'm asking them for a black or white answer. So instead of doing that at a very simplistic level, I can say, forget that bit. Actually, I want to acquire another factory. Here are some options. What do you think? And I have my favourite, and here it is. And this is why. So what we're starting is a process where people get to use their brains. When we're dealing with commitment, we're talking about the process of getting to commitment being much more important than the inputs. So the outputs actually come about by what people bring with them to the table, and that's their brains, that's their complicity. What we're actually going for in commitment is complicity. People need to feel that they were part of the show from the very beginning. Mandating steps is tricky for the person who's trying to do it. It's a pain for the other people because it misses the point. The commitment has to come from people. Commitment can't come from us telling people to be it. Okay, so I want to give some more of the explanation behind what I think are the building blocks and the behaviours that we can use to get people not just on board, because that again smacks of persuasion, but actually get people to want to be there and to want to join in. So I'm not a golfer. Some of you will be. I know that some of you are, because I can see who's with us today. In fact, Bob, this was made for you, and you know who you are. So here we go. So I was thinking, okay, well, what is this like? This business of getting commitment from people. Well, what's a metaphor? So here we are. So I think it's actually very much like being on a golf course. And why is that? Okay, so one thing that golf courses have is some very specific objectives, and the objectives are visually extremely clear. They're called pins, I think. They're not flags, they're pins. Well, I think it has a flag, but it's essentially a pin, I think. I'll be corrected by the golfers. And the ideal here is that what we actually do is to set the objective, but then we actually then just talk about parameters. As we get closer, we go from the distant objective, the close objective, and we step back and say, okay, what is it going to take to get there? So as the leader, as the initiator, I can of course set the parameters. I point out the shark-infested pool. I point out the bunkers, the dips, the trees, the water. I can help to point out the obstacles, although you too will also be able to do that. But what I'm not going to do is to tell you what route to take. I'm hoping that that's going to come from you. Now, if it doesn't, of course, you turn round and you ask me, any ideas, boss? Or, John, how are we going to do this? But that's okay, because then you are complicit in the plan. But I have to assume that you've got a brain and experience, else you wouldn't be in the room, and you have an idea of how to troubleshoot. I was with somebody yesterday down in Bristol, and he said he was not terribly happy with his current situation, and I said, well, what's changed? What did you used to have that you don't have now? This is a very senior, very, very senior bloke. And the situation had changed, and he starts a company, and then he finds himself rather less in charge of it. And he said, the biggest change for me is that I don't get to make the decisions anymore. I'm not allowed to think. And as a result, often the impression is that he's checked out. And that is a terrible shame. And if you think that can happen right at the top of a company, you can imagine what's happening amongst the troops if you are routinely persuading them, trying to get them to agree to do stuff for you and with you. Okay, so you've got parameters, but also we need to provide options. Now, in providing options or giving people the opportunity to do that, naturally, people are going to get it wrong. And that has to be okay. Now, of course, this is often in the planning phase, but people need to be able to put stupid suggestions in and try stuff out, at least on paper. And again, that's part of the discovery process. That's part of them getting to the point that you thought you were at. I say that because the chances are that even through the stupid discussions, you will find that stuff comes up that you hadn't thought of. So this business about, even stupid, there's no such thing as a stupid idea. It's not just for effect. It's not just a brainstorming convention. It actually works in building commitment. What's important above all is that people have, as you're getting the impression now, is that people have the option. If people don't have the option, if we try and make it a binary affair, staying with the golf metaphor, you look at this, and even I, as a golf dunderhead, can see where I have to start and where I have to finish. I have very few options. When people do this to me, and probably the fact that I work for myself is a clue as to how willing I am to even risk being told what to do. But when people do this to me, and when I see them doing it to each other, it brings out the rebel in us. People like to plough their own furrow. We like to think. When we're told what to do, and you will recognise this if you have teenagers or nephews and nieces, and even toddlers, you tell them what to do beyond a certain age, and you've got trouble. You've got to load yourself with a whole heap of work that you don't need. So the very spirit that we want people to act with gets crushed when we try to get people to agree, because it's not giving them the latitude to be able to think straight, to be able to think for themselves, to decide that they want what you want. So we have roles. as leaders or leaders of change or leaders or people who are trying to get commitment. And the way I thought about it in my head is there are sort of three things that I see that are really important for somebody who wants to get commitment and follow through, which is, you've got commitment when you actually get the action. And I see them doing three things. And the first, you won't be surprised to hear, is even before the action has begun. So the first role that you need to take on is the architect. Way before you're asking people that commitment question, are you with this? What are you going to do about it? You actually have to set the rules up way before then. So one of the elements of your grand design needs to be options. The question is put out there before everybody gets together, and you ask people to start thinking about options. Do some homework before you arrive. The next thing is that people have to understand that there is an endpoint, and it sounds pedantic, but it really, really works, is to actually write up that endpoint in the room, have a physical anchor that people and you can refer to as the meeting strays off. It will stray off. And it is not too kindergarten, it is not too 101 to put up on the wall, on the desk, a physical representation of where things have to end up. And if you want dates, if you want and use action words, put dates in, but start, do, stop, complete, make, achieve. They are all verbs. They're all things that are to do with doing. And put that up, and so that you can keep on bringing people down around to it. No cannot be an option. So people can say no, but it has to be no, but I have another idea. So people can say what they like, provided that they're actually bringing something to the table, and that's an important element. And this is also about now. A decision now, a commitment to act now, is much better than agreement in 6 months' time. And the last thing, and this is really, really important, people need to understand what silence is about. Now, let me explain, and it'll come up again. There we go. My computer's not keeping up. So silence, what's that about? If people choose to stay quiet, and you need to make this clear, it does not mean that they're saying no, and it does not mean that they're saying yes, but it does mean that you will end up calling them on it. You're going to listen to them. You are going to bring them into the room, and people need to understand that right at the very beginning. So silence attracts listening attention, because often silence is used as a, dare I say the word, tactic to stay out of the decision-making process just in case it doesn't pan out. And that's something that you can mandate as not on. So that's the architect. Okay. So the second piece, and we've started to talk about this here, the second role is the one of the counsellor. The counsellor, for me, is the person who is listening out for problems, listening out for solutions and ideas. But people have to, of course, believe that you are really serious about listening. You have to train yourself to be a compelling listener, and part of what that involves is parking your idea and parking the stampede to agreement. you shouldn't need to ask for commitment by the end when you've been listening to people, because they will tell you that they are ready to move on and that they are ready to act. If you're having to ask for commitment, unless you're really sure you've got it already, you haven't listened properly or enough, or you have allowed people to stay silent. So listening, for me, this counselling piece is really at the core of getting people committed. Because not everybody will come forwards. Some people will need to be pulled along. And I think the key tool, the key capability in the person who's trying to get commitment is to listen. This is how it sounds. The sort of phrases that might come out of your mouth might be, you sound annoyed that we're trying to pursue this. You don't sound very keen. It sounds like you might prefer to do option 1 than option 2. You sound worried about the financial consequences. If you can't work out why somebody's quiet, you can tell them that too. John, you're quiet, but I'm not at all sure why. I suspect it's not for a good reason, or a positive reason, or because you agree. Flushing people out as the counsellor is probably the single most important thing you can do. It's not about coming out with the best idea or the best rationale. It's about doing the best listening that you can, because then you know what you're dealing with. Okay, so that's the counsellor. The third role is from another world entirely, and this is the cox, the person who sits at the back of the boat, very occasionally at the front, with their head sticking out round about here. And this is the person who is actually calling out the stroke and directing. So they are in charge of forward motion, keeping things moving forward, keeping an eye on people to find out how they're doing, not to criticise them, but to find out where they're getting stuck. The cox is there to provide focus as well. And occasionally they need to actually speed things up. So things happen that we don't realise or we didn't plan for, and it's the person who's asked for commitment who needs to, and sometimes his pre-commitment, they need to say that there is a burning platform. But they're not telling people what to do or what the solution is. So, what are the words? How do we actually ask for commitment? Okay, so you've done your listening, and what's absolutely vital is that you have actually paid attention to all the possible objections, and you know that you're on pretty safe territory, because people are nodding and they're saying, yeah, and I'll do this and I'll do this and I'll do this. So you kind of know that the commitment thing is not quite a done deal, but you're very close. So what you say is, I'm keen. You use words to describe your feelings. I'm keen, preferably with a double E, to get your commitment. And if it's not going fast enough, I might be worried that we're not moving fast enough. You can also give that kind of feedback with emotion type words to ideas that you like and don't like. You don't have to discount them. You don't even have to say you disagree. In fact, you can totally eradicate the word disagree from your vocabulary. It is much better to give feedback to ideas rather than to slap them down. And perhaps give feedback at the end. unless it's going really off beam. So the architect is setting it up and making sure that people understand what's required and what's going on. The counsellor chiefly is there doing the listening and making sure that people are pulling together, making sure that they're getting on with it, looking for their obstacles, not looking for fault. And then we've got the Cox, who is actually there to make sure that people understand what's going on, where the direction needs to change a little bit, or when there's something that's about to go wrong. So, in fact, I'm going to bring that scene back because there's something else I wanted to show you on that, and that is about how we actually tell when something's already started to go wrong. What do you actually do? Because you'll know that there's times when you are going to need to push people, and times when you're going to actually need to pull people along with you. And so I want to give you an idea of what that language sounds like. Okay, so let me come back here. Okay, so pull and push. There are times when you actually need to listen, and times when you actually need to do some persuading. And the interesting bit is, or the important bit is, to know when to swap. So here is a very simple way of deciding whether you should be pushing your colleagues along or pulling them along by listening. So here we go. So this is about feelings. And this is all relative. So for example, scenario 1, relatively speaking, you are feeling okay relative to them. Intuitively, would you think this is an opportunity to talk about yourself and your feelings or theirs? Well, of course, it's an opportunity to talk about their feelings. So we empathize. When we see that the other people around or the other individual isn't quite as happy as we are, relatively speaking, we pay attention to them. There's only one other scenario that really counts for now. If you think you're coming off worse in the conversation, in this piece of commitment getting, and they seem relatively comfortable or unmoved, then it's time for you to speak up, to talk about your feelings. If they're unhappy, you talk about theirs. If you're unhappier, relatively, you talk about your own. And that's all there is to it. So what does this sound like in practice? Let me just find, here we go. In practice, this might sound like this. There are a number of things that people have to say, and you're wondering, oh gosh, have I really got their commitment? I'm not sure. I'll try. Let's see what happens. And at that point, then of course, it's time for you to speak and say, you sound worried. It doesn't sound like you're on board yet. So it's actually you pointing out that you've heard their feelings behind the hints. So hesitant language is the big clue that you haven't got commitment. And all you need to do then is to pay attention to it. Don't fall into the trap of trying to persuade at that stage. It simply won't work, because they will start to put up the barriers, throw in the rocks, and you're back to square one. You're back to the agreement getting campaign. Okay, I'd be really keen to hear your thoughts. So, points of agreement, disagreement, questions. What are you thinking? So you can write that up in the Q&A pane. Okay, one question that's come up is, what if it's my boss? What if I'm actually trying to get commitment from my boss? How does that work? Well, actually, really, that's almost easier, because you're going to her or him with the idea. The mistake that many people make, and this is at all levels of seniority, is to go to their boss and do something which is very old style, which is to ask for permission. Can I do this? Or would it be all right if I did that? Or can I start thinking about that? Well, actually, these days, people don't have the time for their reports to come to them with requests. Actually, what seems to be much more welcome now is for people to go along with something that they want to do, and they have researched and they've got ideas about. And rather than asking, please may I do this, it's actually, is there any reason why I can't? I think this is going to achieve A, B, and C. So actually getting commitment from above is probably even easier, because many people who we report into don't actually have the time to come up with the ideas. But that means that we have to do that homework for them. So there's that one. A question from Dan. If you don't persuade at this stage, what do you do to overcome the resistance? So thanks, Dan. Good one. If you find yourself persuading, you already know that you've taken the wrong path. And so if people are saying, oh no, I don't know about that, then that's the time to stop thinking about commitment, because you're not there yet. And that's back to the listening. The problem with this business of listening is that everybody thinks they know how to do it. And sometimes I worry, the main worry that I have, and I discuss this with colleagues, is that we're working with clients who are very intelligent and they get the premise, they get the theory of listening, but then they just stop thinking about it. They don't actually do it. They say, oh yeah, we know we have to listen, but then people don't actually do it. So actually paying attention, you sound worried, you seem concerned, you don't sound keen. And those phrases and others, whatever you read in the other person, that's where the action is. What you're actually doing is dealing with the obstacles to commitment. They will commit. It's just there's too much stuff in the way. So if you find yourself trying to sell the idea, trying to come up with good reasons, you're going off in the wrong direction for me. I hope that does it for you, Dan. Sally asks, what if you cannot always involve people in certain decisions but still need to gain their commitment? For example, when recruiting a new team member, they cannot always have a say in who it should be. No, okay, that's a good one. So what you can do is ask people, okay, let's say they have heard who it's going to be. They met the 4 candidates and they think, oh gosh, you're not going to recruit her. And so then it's listening in retrospect. So saying, okay, what were you most worried about her, or what's up? I can see you're really turned off by that, and listening to that. That is already that is the only step that you can take, I believe. But it's also all you need to do, because people need to feel that they've been heard, and that they maybe have even warned somebody, but also it gives you an opportunity to hear their assumptions and to maybe then respond. Because if they are genuinely worried about that particular thing, there should be a solution to that, but they will be the key to it. They will give you the hints, they will give you the clues as to what's going to make it okay for them again. So listening again, Sally. Okay, there are quite a few more questions. I'm just going to go to the summary now, and then we'll come back in injury time, as it were. Hopefully you have time to come back after 1:15, but just so that people can leave on time. Okay, so final thoughts from me. Well, firstly, for me, this is about setting the direction. If you set the direction and get people's minds onto it, you've got them right from the very beginning. If you put an intricate plan together, it's very much harder for people to buy in. Secondly, as I said to Dan, stop persuading. If you find yourself selling the benefits beyond your sort of introductory statement, selling the benefits in the face of a disagreement, then again, for me, you're barking up the wrong tree. If you get disagreement, that's about listening immediately. And thirdly, listen. I mean, really listen until there's no more listening to be done. For those of you who can stay, I'll stick around and tackle the remaining questions. Okay, Linda asked, how do you get commitment from a devil's advocate? Okay, here's an interesting. That immediately I'm thinking assertiveness, actually calling them on it. That I suppose that the first port of call for me is devil's advocate. Really, really useful. A bit of a pain to deal with, and they can be abrasive, but really, really useful because they get all the difficult possibilities out on the table, and you can call it out. You can say, Peter, Jane, Sally, you're playing devil's advocate. Okay, keep it coming. Let's go through these. And then again, it's listening, Linda. It's, so you're worried about this because of that. And playing it back, not trying to deal with any of the objections, just getting them all out. The main thing is to not come back with lots of bright ideas about why they are wrong, because that then puts up the barriers. Anne says, I've seen a meeting where people have become gridlocked in disagreement and it just escalated. I agree about using multi-attitudinal approaches rather than just the agree, disagree. And on that one, Anne, actually, when it does start to go into meltdown, one of the most useful things we can do is to actually call it out. And it sounds like, I feel uncomfortable now, or I can see the temperature in the room. I can feel the temperature of the room going up. Are we still happy to continue? Would you like a break? Should we listen to each other? So call it out, bring it into the room. And people are great at correcting themselves, their own behaviour, and getting a grip of themselves once it's been called out. That's what I would do there, Anne. Ian, what to do if your report is very strong character and is locking heads with one of your other reports? I am a great advocate for the uncomfortable conversation of getting both people in the room, and not in the room, but go and have a cup of coffee together somewhere and say, okay, you guys, I know you've both got strong opinions. You're both wanting to persuade the other. Let's have a conversation about that now. And then you can help them to be in charge of the behaviour whilst they get on with disagreeing or agreeing with each other. So what you can do as the third party is to promote a really good quality argument where they're not nitpicking, but they're actually having a proper exchange of views. Even if it's heated, in my book, that's absolutely fine, because I can call that out. Jane, you seem really irritated by what John's just said. I guess that's because da-da-da-da. So I kind of do the listening for them until they can start to do it for themselves and things really calm down. What doesn't work, again, this is trying to get agreement, is to trying to get them to agree prematurely or to get them to settle down or to take the heat out of it. I do not like people telling me or people telling each other to calm down. It is petrol on the fire. And rightly so, because it makes us feel like children, and we don't like that, even if we're behaving in a childlike way. So hopefully that works for you, Ian. Alison, how do I respond to those who say they agree, are nodding and otherwise talk as though they are committed, but you leave them to it and later they find they haven't followed through on what was agreed? Yeah, it's the helmets thing, isn't it? It's I'll do a bit of work and you do a bit of work and then hopefully you'll forget about it. The thing is that again, for me it's calling it out, and if there is any doubt in your mind whatsoever, Alison, you look around the table and they say, oh yeah, okay, I'll do that. And you can say, you sound like you're going to do it, but something in me, I'm skeptical. Or this was too easy. Are you absolutely sure? Now, one person, I can't remember when it was about 6 months ago, I actually was sitting with a boss and one of their reports, and the report said, oh yeah, I'm going to do this, and this. Oh, I've just remembered who it is now. And much to the consternation of the group, instead of the boss allowing the individual to pile on the work, he was saying, well, so when are you going to do that, and how are you going to do that, and how are you loaded in that and that? And so the boss was almost reading out the individual's to-do list, their list of responsibilities. He made it very easy for his report to say, oh gosh, I'm overcommitting. And so maybe we need to make it really easy for people to say, I'm overcommitting, or I don't agree. And that's what the listening is about. Listening isn't just about hearing. As you know, it's about looking for the clues, the flinch, the premature packing up of papers, the fidgeting, the looking around the room. You know, you're an experienced human being. You will know when somebody isn't absolutely going to do it. And if they're good at acting, go back to history and don't trust your eyes. Hopefully that does it for you, Alison. Another one here from Graham. How do you gain commitment from an individual companies if the group proposal is perceived detrimental and threatening to them individually? Okay. So part of it, I think, is getting that called out, and exactly what people are afraid of losing for their companies. That might have to be done in private, but as a group, if you can, that works best of all, because then people can see that there are other people who stand to lose. What's also important, I think, in that situation, Graham, is actually presenting them with the endpoint and saying, look, we can't credibly leave this room as a leadership team without getting to that endpoint, notwithstanding the fact that some of us will be losing out. So it's actually putting the responsibility back with the people who are sitting in the room and saying, look, I'm not going to persuade you. You're going to have to persuade yourself, because that's just the way it is. So actually, what does that amount to? That amounts to talking about the talk, talking about how you're going to have the conversation, talking about the parameters. And one of the parameters is we have to decide about how to make that end picture happen, even though some of you are going to lose out. Now, of course, in Nirvana, that end picture doesn't get decided without the people. And I've worked in organisations where people actually were the authors of their own demise. And when that has happened, and it's happened many times, or certainly a good few times that I can remember, they were actually incredibly professional and keen to get it right, even though they knew they were doing themselves or their division out of jobs. So it's getting that very early involvement. Here we go. Oh yes, Dan. I think. Are there any? Dan, good question here on telephone. Are there any differences with the process over the phone? The main differences, Dan, is that you have to listen even harder, and you have to listen for the silences. And if you're not sure how the other person feels, then probe, empathise. You've gone a bit quiet there, John. Does that mean a yes or a no? I'm not sure. That's on the empathy side. On the assertiveness is, I'm worried about leaving it like this because I'm not sure that you really want to do this. So calling out their fears or calling out yours, for me, is the way to do it on the phone, because you haven't got all the visual stuff going on. Hopefully that does it for you. Great. That's it for the questions. Thank you so much for staying on if you did. Oh, good for you if you did. And see you in a couple of months' time. Have a terrific weekend when it comes along. Bye for now.